The doctor's appointment was supposed to be routine, just a follow-up after my hip surgery 3 months ago. I was 79, recovering well, walking with a cane but managing. I didn't expect to find my daughter-in-law sitting in my living room when I came home, going through my financial documents. Papers were spread across my coffee table, bank statements, investment records, the deed to my house, my will, the copy I kept in my desk drawer that was supposed to be private. She looked up when I walked in, and she didn't even have the decency to look guilty. "We need to talk about your future," she said, as if she hadn't just broken into my desk and violated my privacy. I stood in the doorway of my own living room, leaning on my cane, looking at my son's wife going through my life like she had every right to it. "What are you doing with my papers?" "Planning. Someone has to think ahead. You just had major surgery. You're not getting any younger. We need to make arrangements before something happens." "Arrangements for what?" "For when you can't live alone anymore. For when you need full-time care. For when decisions have to be made about this house, your assets, your health care. Someone needs to be prepared, and since you clearly aren't thinking about these things, I'm doing it for you." She spoke with the calm authority of someone who'd already decided everything, like I wasn't standing right there, like my life was a problem she needed to solve. "Those are my private documents. You had no right to go through them." "I have every right. I'm family, and family takes care of these things when elderly people can't manage anymore." "I am managing. I had hip surgery, not brain surgery. I'm recovering exactly as expected." "For now, but how long before the next surgery, the next fall, the next crisis? We need to be realistic about your limitations." I didn't argue. I observed. I watched her hand resting possessively on my bank statements. I noticed she'd organized the papers by category: medical, financial, property, legal. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment violation. This was systematic. And I realized they assumed I would fade away after the surgery, assumed I'd come home weak and dependent, assumed I'd need help I couldn't refuse. They assumed wrong. That was their first mistake. I walked slowly to my chair and sat down, keeping my expression neutral. "Where's my son?" "At work, but we've discussed this extensively. We're in complete agreement about what needs to happen." "And what needs to happen?" "You need to sign power of attorney over to us, medical and financial. That way, when the next crisis comes, and it will come, we're already in position to make necessary decisions without legal delays." "I see, and if I don't want to sign power of attorney?" "Then you're being unrealistic and stubborn. You're putting your pride ahead of practical planning. At your age, with your health issues, refusing to let family help is irresponsible." They assumed I would fade away. They assumed hip surgery at 79 meant the beginning of the end. They assumed I'd be so weak, so grateful for help, so afraid of being alone that I'd hand over control of my life without resistance. I didn't. Now listen, before I tell you what I did when I found her sitting in my living room with my entire life spread across the table, before I show you what happens when people mistake a cane for weakness, I need you to do something. If you're watching and you've ever had someone treat your recovery like your ending, hit subscribe. Comment where you're watching from, because what happened when they assumed I would fade away and I didn't, you need to hear every word. Turn on notifications. This story goes to places they never saw coming. Her name was Fiona. She'd been married to my son Terrence for 8 years. In those 8 years, I'd watched her slowly establish authority in his life, in their marriage, and now, apparently, in my life. I'd raised Terrence alone after his father abandoned us when Terrence was 6. I'd worked 2 jobs to keep us stable. I'd put him through college. I'd supported him when he started his business. I'd been there for every struggle, every success, every moment. And when he married Fiona, I'd welcomed her, tried to build a relationship, tried to be the kind of mother-in-law who helped without interfering. But Fiona didn't want help. She wanted control. It started small. Suggestions about how I should manage my house, comments about my spending habits, observations about my health. "You're getting older. You should think about downsizing." "Do you really need to spend money on trips at your age?" Have you considered what will happen if you get sick? I dismissed it as concern. Fiona worked in healthcare administration. She was used to planning, organizing, managing. I told myself she meant well. But after my hip surgery 3 months ago, something shifted. The surgery was planned. I'd had arthritis in my hip for years. It got to the point where I couldn't walk without pain. My doctor recommended replacement. I agreed. The surgery went well. Recovery was exactly as expected. 6 weeks of limited mobility, physical therapy, gradual improvement. Standard procedure for a 79-year-old woman. But Terrence and Fiona treated it like I'd had a near-death experience. They insisted I couldn't go home alone after the hospital. I spent 2 weeks at their house, recovering. Which really meant Fiona hovering, monitoring, making decisions about my medication schedule, my physical therapy, my daily routine. When I said I was ready to go home, Fiona objected. "You're not strong enough yet. What if you fall? What if you need help in the middle of the night?" "I have a medical alert system. I have physical therapy scheduled. I'll be fine." "You're being stubborn. We're trying to help you and you're pushing us away." But I went home anyway, and for 3 months I'd been recovering exactly as expected, walking with a cane, doing my exercises, getting stronger every week. I thought that would be the end of it, that they'd see I was managing and back off. Instead, I came home from a routine doctor's appointment to find Fiona going through my private documents. "How did you get into my desk?" "The drawer wasn't locked. It was closed, in my private study. Fiona, you went into my home office and opened my desk drawers." "Because someone needs to understand your financial situation. Terrence and I need to know what we're working with." "Working with for what?" "For when you need care. Do you have long-term care insurance? What's the equity in this house? How liquid are your assets? These are questions that need answers before there's a crisis." "I'm not in crisis. I'm recovering from planned surgery." "This time, but you're 79. The next crisis could be a stroke, a fall that's worse than the last one. Dementia, we need to be prepared." I didn't tell her I'd had that exact conversation with my attorney 6 months before the surgery. That I'd updated my will, established a healthcare directive, and put protections in place specifically to prevent what Fiona was currently attempting. I didn't argue. I remembered. I remembered every time Fiona had suggested I was getting too old to live alone. Every comment about my house being too much for me. Every conversation where she'd positioned herself as the person who'd eventually have to deal with my decline. And I understood. Fiona wasn't planning for an emergency. She was planning to create one. "I want you to leave." "Excuse me." "I want you to put my papers back exactly where you found them and leave my house." "I'm trying to help you." By invading my privacy, by going through my financial documents without permission, Fiona, that's not help. That's violation. "You're overreacting. Family members discuss these things. It's responsible planning." "No, responsible planning is the person whose life it is making their own arrangements, which I've done. What you're doing is deciding what's best for me without including me in the decision. Because you're not being realistic about your limitations. My limitations are mine to assess, not yours. Now please leave." Fiona stood up slowly, her face tight with anger. "Terrence is going to hear about this. He'll be very disappointed that you rejected our help. Tell him whatever you want, but don't come into my house and go through my private papers again." After she left, I sat in my living room for a long time, just thinking. They assumed I would fade away after the surgery. Assumed I'd come home weak and scared and grateful for someone to take charge. They assumed wrong. But the fact that they'd assumed it at all told me something important. They'd been planning this. The helpful offers during recovery. The comments about my age and limitations. The invasion of my privacy today. This wasn't spontaneous concern. This was strategy. I needed to understand the full scope of what they were planning. I called my attorney. Her name was Patricia Caldwell, and she'd been handling my legal matters for 20 years. Patricia, I need to ask you something. If someone wanted to take control of an elderly person's finances and property against their will, what would they need? Are we talking about you? Hypothetically, they'd need power of attorney, which you haven't granted anyone, or they'd need to have you declared incompetent and get guardianship through the courts. How would they prove incompetence? Medical evidence, documentation of decline, testimony from doctors or caregivers about your inability to manage your affairs. It's not easy to get guardianship over someone who's resisting, but it can be done if there's sufficient evidence. And if someone was building a case, what would that look like? They'd document everything: medical appointments, medication errors, bills that weren't paid on time, maintenance issues with the home, anything that could be framed as evidence that the person can't manage independently. Why are you asking? Because I think my daughter-in-law is building exactly that kind of case. I told Patricia about finding Fiona with my documents, about the comments during recovery, about the pattern of positioning herself as the person who'd need to take charge when I couldn't manage anymore. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We need to document your competence comprehensively: medical evaluation, cognitive assessment, financial management review, everything that proves you're managing your life successfully. If Fiona tries to pursue guardianship, we'll need ironclad evidence that she's wrong." Over the next 2 weeks, I did exactly that. I got a comprehensive geriatric evaluation from Dr. Mitchell Barnes, a specialist in elderly care. The results: excellent cognitive function, appropriate medication management, good physical recovery from surgery, no signs of decline that would affect my ability to live independently. I had my financial advisor provide documentation that my bills were paid on time. My investments were managed appropriately, and I was making sound financial decisions. I had my home inspector come and verify that my house was well maintained with no safety hazards. And I documented everything in a file that Patricia kept in her office, ready to use if Fiona tried what I suspected she was planning. But I didn't tell Terrence or Fiona about any of it. I just continued my recovery, acted normally, and waited to see what they'd do next. I didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks after the document incident, Terrence called. "Mom, Fiona told me what happened, that you threw her out of the house when she was trying to help you plan for the future. I asked her to leave after I found her going through my private financial documents without permission. She was trying to understand your situation so we could help you." Did I ask for that help? You shouldn't have to ask. Mom, you're 79. You just had major surgery. We're your family. We should be involved in planning for what comes next. What comes next is my business, Terrence, not yours. That's exactly the kind of denial Fiona was talking about. Mom, you're not thinking clearly about your limitations. My limitations are being managed just fine. I'm recovering well. I'm living independently. I'm making my own decisions. Those are facts, not denial. Fiona thinks you need more support than you're willing to admit. Fiona thinks she should be managing my life. There's a difference. Why are you being so hostile to someone who's trying to help you? Because her help looks a lot like control. Terrence, did you know she was going through my private papers? She told me she was reviewing your documents to understand your financial situation. Without asking me, without my permission. Terrence, that's a violation, not help. Mom, we're worried about you. Can't you see that? We're trying to make sure you're taken care of. I am taken care of, by myself. I don't need you and Fiona taking over. Then you need to prove it. Fiona suggested you should sign power of attorney so that if something happens, we're already in position to help. If you're really managing fine, that shouldn't be a problem. There it was, the real agenda. Get me to sign power of attorney so they'd have legal control over my finances and healthcare decisions. I'm not signing power of attorney. Why not? If you trust us, if you're confident in your decisions, what's the harm in having a backup plan? The harm is giving up control of my life to people who have made it clear they think I can't manage it myself. We don't think that. Fiona literally said I'm in denial about my limitations and need someone else to make realistic decisions. Terrence, that's not a backup plan. That's a takeover. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. Mom, we were hoping you'd be reasonable about this. But if you won't cooperate with basic planning, we might have to pursue other options to make sure you're protected. What other options? Legal options. Fiona knows people who work in elder care. She knows what the process is for getting someone into a safer living situation when they're resisting necessary help. Guardianship. He was threatening guardianship. Terrence, are you threatening to have me declared incompetent? I'm saying that if you continue to refuse reasonable help and reasonable planning, we might have to take steps to ensure your safety whether you agree or not. I hung up. I sat in my living room, shaking slightly, and I understood something I'd been avoiding. This wasn't going to stop. Fiona had decided I was declining and needed control. Terrence had been convinced, and they were going to pursue it whether I cooperated or not. They assumed I would fade away after surgery. When I didn't, they decided to force it. That was the moment I understood what I was really dealing with. Not concern, not help, not family looking out for an elderly mother. This was a plan to take control of my life, my home, and my assets by framing my independence as incompetence. And I needed to be smarter than they were if I wanted to protect myself. 3 days later, something happened that confirmed all my suspicions. I came home from physical therapy to find a woman on my front porch. She introduced herself as Linda Chen from Senior Care Services. Mrs. Morrison, I received a call expressing concerns about your welfare. I'm here to do a wellness check. Who called you? I can't disclose that, but someone who cares about you is worried that you might be struggling to live safely on your own after recent surgery. May I come in and ask you a few questions? They'd called social services, reported me as someone who couldn't manage independently, created an official record of concerns about my ability to care for myself. I let Linda in. I showed her my clean, well-organized house. I walked her through my daily routine, my medication schedule, my physical therapy progress. I was calm, articulate, clearly managing my life well. Linda asked careful questions. How was I managing stairs? Did I have support for grocery shopping? Was I keeping up with bills and appointments? I answered everything thoroughly, and I watched Linda take notes, her expression shifting from concern to confusion. Mrs. Morrison, I'm not seeing any evidence of the issues that were reported. Your home is well maintained. You're clearly managing your medication and appointments. Your recovery from surgery seems to be progressing well. Can I ask, do you know who might have called with concerns? My daughter-in-law. She's been pressuring me to sign power of attorney and move into assisted living. When I refused, she apparently decided to create an official record suggesting I can't manage on my own. Linda's expression hardened slightly. That would be a misuse of our services. Mrs. Morrison, I'm going to file a report showing that this wellness check found no concerns about your ability to live independently. I'm also going to note that the call appeared to be made in bad faith. Can I get a copy of that report? Absolutely. After Linda left, I called Patricia. They reported me to senior services claiming I can't manage independently. The investigator found no problems and is documenting that the report was false. Good, that's more evidence for our file, but this tells me they're escalating. They're trying to build an official record of incompetence. We need to be ready for the next move. The next move came faster than I expected. 1 week later, I received a letter from an attorney named Robert Winters. Dear Mrs. Morrison, I represent Terrence Morrison and Fiona Morrison regarding concerns about your ability to live independently and manage your affairs. My clients have documented evidence of declining health, unsafe living conditions, and refusal of necessary assistance. We are requesting that you voluntarily enter an assisted living facility where you can receive appropriate care. If you refuse, my clients may be forced to petition the court for emergency guardianship to ensure your safety and welfare. Please contact my office within 10 days to discuss arrangements. Sincerely, Robert Winters-esque. They assumed I would fade away. When I didn't, they tried to force it. Now they were threatening to have me declared incompetent and put in a facility against my will. But they'd made one critical miscalculation. They assumed I'd been sitting passively during my recovery, weak and unprepared. I hadn't. And what I'd been preparing was about to show them exactly how wrong they were. Before I continue this story, kindly subscribe, like, turn on the notification bell, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read Robert Winters' letter 3 times. Each time I noticed something different: the careful language, the legal positioning, the escalating threat disguised as concern. Documented evidence of declining health, my hip surgery recovery. Unsafe living conditions, probably the minor things Fiona had noted during her invasion of my house. Refusal of necessary assistance, my declining to sign power of attorney. They were building a narrative, and they thought I didn't see it coming. I called Patricia immediately. They've hired an attorney. They're threatening emergency guardianship if I don't voluntarily enter assisted living. Forward me the letter. We're responding today, and we're filing our own petition. Our own petition. For declaratory judgment that you're competent and don't need a guardian. We're going on offense before they can establish their narrative in court. Patricia's response letter was surgical. Mr. Winters, I represent Mrs. Beatrice Morrison in response to your letter, dated November 18th. Your client's characterization of Mrs. Morrison's situation is false and appears motivated by a desire to control her assets rather than genuine concern for her welfare. Mrs. Morrison is fully competent, as documented by comprehensive medical evaluation, attached. She is recovering well from planned hip surgery. Her home is safe and well-maintained, inspection report attached. She manages her finances appropriately, advisor statement attached. Your client's concerns began only after Mrs. Morrison refused to sign power of attorney giving them control of her finances. When she refused, your clients 1. Invaded her home and reviewed private financial documents without permission. 2. Filed a false report with Senior Care Services. Investigators' report attached showing no concerns found. 3. Are now threatening forced institutionalization. This is not concern. This is attempted exploitation. Mrs. Morrison will not be entering assisted living. She will not be signing power of attorney. If your clients file for guardianship, we will oppose vigorously and present evidence of their financial motives and harassment. Furthermore, we are filing a petition for declaratory judgment that Mrs. Morrison is competent and does not require a guardian. Your client's interference in her independent living must cease. Sincerely, Patricia Caldwell-esque. 2 days after Patricia sent that letter, Terrence showed up at my door. Alone this time. He looked tired and angry. Mom, what are you doing? You hired an attorney to fight us. I hired an attorney to protect myself from people trying to take control of my life against my will. We're not trying to take control. We're trying to help you. By threatening to have me declared incompetent and forced into assisted living, that's help. You're being unreasonable. Mom, you had major surgery. You're almost 80. Why won't you let us help you plan for what's coming? Because what's coming, according to you and Fiona, is me being incompetent and needing you to manage everything. Terrence, I'm not incompetent. I have medical documentation proving it. So you got a doctor to say what you wanted to hear. I got a comprehensive evaluation from a geriatric specialist. He found nothing wrong with my cognitive function, my decision-making ability, or my capacity to live independently. I'm recovering from hip surgery exactly as expected. That's not denial. That's fact. Fiona says. Fiona is not a doctor. She's someone who works in healthcare administration and has decided she knows better than me how I should live. Terrence, when did you start trusting your wife's opinion about my health more than my own doctor's assessments? He looked uncomfortable. Fiona has experience with elderly people. She knows what signs to look for when someone's declining. Signs like recovering from planned surgery, managing my own home, paying my bills on time, making my own decisions. Those are signs of competence, not decline. She says you're in denial about your age and your limitations. And you believe her rather than believing me, the person who's actually living in this body and managing this life. Because you've always been stubborn, Mom. You've always refused to admit when you need help. Give me one example of a time I needed help and refused it. He couldn't. He just stood there, searching for something that would prove Fiona's narrative. Terrence, why is Fiona so focused on my finances? Why did she go through my bank statements and investment records? If this is really about my health and safety, why does she need to know the equity in my house? Because we need to know if you can afford proper care when you need it. I can afford whatever care I need, but that's my business, not yours. Terrence, I raised you alone. I managed money carefully my entire life. I've built security for myself. Why do you suddenly think I can't handle my own finances? Because you're getting older, and Fiona says elderly people often don't realize when they're making poor decisions. Fiona says, Terrence, do you have your own thoughts about this, or are you just repeating everything your wife tells you? His face flushed red. Don't talk about Fiona like that. I'm not talking about Fiona. I'm asking about you, my son. Do you actually believe I'm incompetent, or are you just going along with what Fiona wants? I believe you need help whether you admit it or not. And if you won't accept it voluntarily, then yes, we might have to pursue legal options. Then you should know, I'm ready for that fight. I have medical evaluations, financial records, home safety inspections, witness statements, everything that proves I'm managing my life competently. If you try to have me declared incompetent, you're going to lose. And Terrence, it's going to cost you more than just legal fees. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. If you pursue guardianship, our relationship is over. Permanently. You'll be choosing Fiona's control agenda over your relationship with your mother. Make sure you understand that before you proceed. He left without another word. That evening, Fiona called. She was furious. How dare you threaten Terrence? He came home devastated. I didn't threaten him. I told him the truth. If he tries to have me declared incompetent, we won't have a relationship anymore. You'd cut off your own son for trying to protect you. He's not trying to protect me. You're trying to control me. And you've convinced him it's the same thing. Fiona, I know what you're doing. I know why you went through my financial documents. I know why you're building a case for incompetence. This isn't about my welfare. It's about my assets. That's ridiculous. We're worried about you. Then why did the Senior Care Services investigator find no problems? Why did my doctor give me a clean bill of cognitive health? Why is my house well-maintained and my bills paid on time? Fiona, if I was really declining, there would be actual evidence. But there isn't any. Because I'm not declining. I'm recovering from planned surgery exactly as expected. You're 79. You had major surgery. Whether you want to admit it or not, you're vulnerable. Vulnerable to what? To you going through my private papers? To you filing false reports? To you threatening guardianship? Yes, I'm vulnerable to those things. That's why I've hired an attorney. You're making a huge mistake. We were trying to do this the easy way, but if you want to fight, we'll fight. And when a judge sees a 79-year-old woman who just had hip surgery refusing family help, they're going to side with us. We'll see. She hung up. I sat with my cane, resting against my chair. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years, the cold clarity of being in a real fight. They assumed I would fade away. When I didn't, they escalated. Now it was a legal battle, and I needed to be strategic. Patricia called the next morning. I filed the declaratory judgment petition. We have a hearing scheduled in 4 weeks. But there's something you need to know. Terrence and Fiona filed their own guardianship petition yesterday. How bad is it? It's aggressive. They're claiming you're incapable of managing your affairs due to age-related decline. They have statements from Fiona about observing confusion, medication errors, and unsafe conditions during your recovery at their house. They're arguing that your refusal to accept help is evidence of impaired judgment. All of that is false. I know, but it's what they're claiming. We need to prove it's false. Do you remember the 2 weeks you stayed at their house after surgery? Every day, Fiona monitored everything. Medication, meals, bathroom breaks. It was suffocating, but I wasn't confused or making errors. She was just controlling. Did you take your medications incorrectly at any point? No, Fiona gave them to me on her schedule, not the schedule my doctor prescribed. When I told her the timing was wrong, she said she knew better. But I didn't take them incorrectly. She just didn't like that I questioned her system. That's important. They're going to claim you were making medication errors. We need to prove you were following doctor's orders and Fiona was the one deviating from the plan. Do you have documentation? My discharge papers from the hospital have the medication schedule, and I can get a statement from my surgeon's office about the prescribed timing. Over the next 3 weeks, Patricia and I built our case. We had my surgeon, Dr. Ellen Park, provide a detailed statement about my recovery. Mrs. Morrison followed all post-surgical protocols perfectly. She attended every physical therapy appointment. She took medications as prescribed. Her recovery has been exemplary for a woman of her age. There is no medical evidence of cognitive decline or impaired judgment. We had the Senior Care Services report documenting that the wellness check found no concerns. We had my financial advisor provide records showing I managed my accounts appropriately, paid bills on time, and made sound investment decisions. We had my home inspector provide a detailed safety assessment showing my house was well-maintained with appropriate modifications for someone recovering from hip surgery. And we had something else, something I'd been documenting since the day I found Fiona going through my papers. I'd started keeping a journal, every interaction, every conversation, every time Fiona or Terrence said something about my supposed decline or their need to take charge. I'd written it all down with dates and details, and Patricia said it would be powerful evidence. Judges see a lot of these cases, she explained. Adult children claiming an elderly parent is incompetent. Usually it's hard to tell who's right, the concerned children or the defensive parent. But your documentation shows a clear pattern. They started pushing for control immediately after your surgery. They escalated when you refused. They're not responding to actual decline. They're creating a narrative of decline to justify taking over. The hearing was scheduled for December 15th. 4 days before, something happened that nearly destroyed my case. I fell. Not a major fall. I was walking from my bedroom to the bathroom in the middle of the night, still a bit unsteady in the dark, and I tripped over the edge of a rug. I went down hard on my side. Nothing broke, but I was badly bruised and shaken. I managed to get to my medical alert button and pressed it. The paramedics came. They checked me over, found no serious injury, but recommended I go to the emergency room for x-rays just to be safe. I spent 4 hours in the ER that night. X-rays showed no fractures. I was bruised and sore, but fine. The doctor cleared me to go home with instructions to rest and use ice for the bruising. But the fall created an official medical record. Emergency room visit. Paramedics called. Elderly woman who'd recently had hip surgery falling in her own home. When Patricia found out, she was worried. This is exactly the kind of thing they'll use against you. They'll say it proves you're not safe living alone. It was an accident. I tripped on a rug in the dark. That could happen to anyone. I know, but the timing is terrible. 3 days before the hearing, you have a fall that requires emergency services. They're going to argue this proves their point. What do? We get ahead of it. We have the ER doctor provide a statement that the fall was an accident, not a medical emergency. We have you remove the rug and document that you've made your home safer. We show the judge that you're capable of identifying hazards and correcting them, which is actually evidence of good judgment, not decline. That's exactly what we did. The ER doctor provided a statement. Mrs. Morrison's fall was the result of tripping on a rug in low light conditions. This is a common household accident and not indicative of any underlying medical condition or impairment. She responded appropriately by using her medical alert system. X-rays showed no fractures. She was cleared for home discharge. I removed the rug and every other tripping hazard in my house. I had the home inspector come back and document the changes. And I prepared for court. The hearing took place in a small courtroom. Judge Raymond Foster presiding. Terrence and Fiona with their attorney Robert Winters on one side, me with Patricia on the other. The judge reviewed the petitions. We have competing petitions here. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison seeking guardianship of Mrs. Beatrice Morrison due to alleged incompetence, and Mrs. Morrison seeking a declaration that she's competent and doesn't need a guardian. Mr. Winters, you filed first. Present your case. Robert Winters stood. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of an elderly woman who can't safely live alone but refuses to admit it. Mrs. Morrison is 79 years old. She recently had major hip surgery. She's falling in her home. There was an emergency room visit just 3 days ago. She refuses family assistance. She's hostile to anyone who expresses concern about her welfare. This is classic denial of decline. He called Fiona as his first witness. Mrs. Morrison, what concerns do you have about your mother-in-law's ability to live independently? She's declining rapidly but won't admit it. After her surgery, she stayed with us for 2 weeks. During that time, I observed significant confusion. She couldn't remember her medication schedule. She argued with me about basic safety measures. She was hostile and paranoid, accusing us of trying to control her when we were just trying to help. Can you give specific examples? She kept insisting I was giving her medications at the wrong times, even though I was following the schedule her doctor gave us. She couldn't keep track of what day it was. She got angry when I tried to help her with basic tasks like bathing and dressing. It was clear she wasn't capable of managing on her own. What happened when she went back to her own home? We tried to stay involved, but she shut us out. She refused to let us help with anything. When I visited to check on her living conditions, I found financial documents scattered everywhere, unpaid bills, medications disorganized. I tried to help her get organized, and she threw me out of the house. Then she hired an attorney to fight us when all we wanted was to make sure she was safe. It was a compelling story. If you didn't know the truth, you'd think Fiona was a concerned daughter-in-law dealing with a difficult, declining elderly woman. Patricia cross-examined. Mrs. Morrison, you testified that your mother-in-law couldn't remember her medication schedule. Do you have medical training? I work in healthcare administration. That's not the same as being a doctor or nurse. Did you consult with Mrs. Morrison's surgeon about the medication schedule? I followed what the hospital told us. Did you know that Mrs. Morrison's surgeon prescribed a specific timing for medications that you changed? Fiona hesitated. I adjusted the schedule to be more convenient. More convenient for whom? For everyone. The hospital's schedule wasn't practical. But Mrs. Morrison wanted to follow her doctor's prescribed schedule, and you overruled her. Correct. She was confused about what the doctor wanted. Or you decided you knew better than her surgeon what medication schedule she should follow, and when she objected, you labeled her as confused. Which is it? Fiona's face flushed. I was trying to help. You testified about finding financial documents scattered everywhere. Where exactly did you find these documents? In her living room. Were they scattered, or were they organized on a table? They were out in the open. Mrs. Morrison, did you go through a closed desk drawer to access those documents? The desk wasn't locked. That's not what I asked. Did you open a drawer in Mrs. Morrison's private home office to access those financial documents? I was trying to understand her financial situation so we could help. Without her permission, you went into her home office, opened her desk, and reviewed private financial documents without asking. Is that correct? Family members should be able to discuss finances. Answer the question. Did you access those documents without Mrs. Morrison's permission? Yes, but... Thank you. No further questions. Next, Robert Winters called Terrence. Mr. Morrison, what concerns do you have about your mother's welfare? She's not being realistic about her limitations. She's almost 80, she just had major surgery, and she's insisting she doesn't need any help. That's not reasonable. My wife and I have tried to help, and she's been hostile and accusatory. She's even threatened to cut me off if I pursue this guardianship. That kind of emotional volatility is concerning. Tell the court about the recent fall. 3 days ago, my mother fell in her home and had to be taken to the emergency room by paramedics. That proves she's not safe living alone. What if she'd been seriously injured? What if next time she can't reach the alert button? We're trying to prevent a tragedy, and she's fighting us every step of the way. Patricia's cross-examination was brief. Mr. Morrison, have you personally observed your mother exhibiting confusion or impaired judgment? Not directly, but Fiona has. I asked about your personal observations. Have you seen your mother make errors or show signs of cognitive decline? She's very defensive when we try to help. That's not cognitive decline. That's disagreement. Mr. Morrison, simple question. Based on your own observations, not your wife's reports, do you believe your mother is incompetent? Terence was quiet for a long moment. I believe she needs help she's not willing to accept. That's not the same as incompetence. Does your mother pay her bills on time? I assume so. Does she manage her medications appropriately? When she's supervised? When she's left to manage them herself, does she take them correctly? I don't know. So you're asking this court to declare your mother incompetent based on concerns raised by your wife, despite having no personal knowledge of any actual impairment. Is that accurate? I'm asking the court to protect my mother from making dangerous decisions. Like the decision to live independently in her own home that she's owned for 30 years. That dangerous decision. She's too old to live alone safely. According to whom? Your wife. Mr. Morrison, did you know your mother had a comprehensive medical evaluation showing excellent cognitive function? Fiona said any doctor would say what an elderly patient wanted to hear. So your wife's opinion matters more than a board-certified geriatric specialist's medical assessment. Terence had no good answer to that. Then it was our turn. Patricia called me to testify. Mrs. Morrison, tell the court about your daily life. I described my routine, morning exercises from physical therapy, managing my medications, the correct schedule following doctor's orders precisely, cooking my own meals, paying my bills online, attending appointments, volunteering at my church, visiting friends. Tell the court about the 2 weeks you stayed with your son and daughter-in-law after surgery. It was difficult. Fiona wanted to control everything. She changed my medication schedule from what my surgeon prescribed, and when I objected, she said I was confused. She monitored when I could use the bathroom, what I could eat, when I could rest. It felt less like care and more like surveillance. When I said I was ready to go home, she fought it. She wanted me to stay longer, indefinitely if possible. Why did you want to go home? Because I'm capable of managing my own recovery. And because staying there, being treated like I was helpless, was making me feel worse, not better. Tell the court about the day you found your daughter-in-law with your financial documents. I explained coming home from a doctor's appointment, finding Fiona in my living room with papers spread across my table, bank statements, investment records, the deed to my house. She wasn't just looking, she'd organized them by category. This wasn't curiosity. This was systematic review of my assets. When I asked what she was doing, she said someone needed to plan for my future since I wasn't being realistic about it. How did you feel? Violated. Those were my private documents, my private financial information. She had no right to access them, let alone organize them and start making plans based on them. Mrs. Morrison, tell the court about the fall 3 days ago. I got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. It was dark. I tripped on the edge of a rug I'd had in that spot for years. I fell on my side. It hurt, but I knew nothing was broken. I used my medical alert button. The paramedics came, checked me over, and took me to the ER just to be safe. X-rays showed no fractures. I was cleared to go home. The next day, I removed that rug and every other tripping hazard in my house. It was an accident, and I responded to it appropriately. Your son and daughter-in-law are arguing that fall proves you're not safe alone. What do you say to that? I say accidents happen. What matters is how you respond. I didn't panic. I used the safety system I have in place. I went to the ER to be checked. I identified the hazard and removed it. That's not incompetence. That's exactly what a competent person does after an accident. Robert Winters cross-examined me aggressively. Mrs. Morrison, you're 79 years old. Don't you think there comes a point when people need to accept help? Yes, when they actually need it. I don't need the kind of help being offered. You fell in your own home. I tripped on a rug in the dark. That's not a medical emergency. It's an accident. But it could have been worse. What if you'd broken your hip? What if you couldn't reach the alert button? What if a meteor hits my house? We can't make decisions based on worst-case scenarios that haven't happened. I fell. I handled it appropriately. I made my home safer. That's evidence of good judgment, not impairment. Your daughter-in-law testified that you were confused during your recovery. My daughter-in-law wanted to control my medication schedule and became frustrated when I insisted on following my doctor's orders. She labeled my objection as confusion. That's not the same thing. You refuse to sign power of attorney giving your family the ability to help you if something happens. I refuse to hand over legal control of my life to people who have demonstrated they want to manage it for their benefit, not mine. That's a serious accusation. Are you saying your son and daughter-in-law have financial motives? I'm saying my daughter-in-law went through my bank statements and investment records without permission, organized them by category, and discussed planning for my future without including me in that planning. That's not concern. That's positioning for control. Or maybe it's a daughter-in-law who cares enough to prepare for when her mother-in-law needs help. If she cared, she would have asked instead of invading my privacy. Mr. Winters, I've lived 79 years. I've managed my life successfully through widowhood, through raising a son alone, through building financial security for myself. I've recovered from hip surgery exactly as my doctors expected. The only crisis here is the one my son and daughter-in-law are trying to create to justify taking control of my life. The hearing lasted 3 hours. At the end, Judge Foster said he'd review all the evidence and issue a ruling within 2 weeks. 2 of the longest weeks of my life. When the ruling came, Patricia called me immediately. We won, complete victory. Judge Foster's written decision was 12 pages. The conclusion. This court finds Mrs. Beatrice Morrison to be fully competent and capable of managing her own affairs. The evidence presented by petitioners Morrison and Morrison consists largely of subjective interpretations of normal recovery behaviors and a single accident that was handled appropriately. In contrast, Mrs. Morrison has presented objective medical evidence of competence, financial records showing appropriate management, and documentation that her home is safe and well-maintained. More concerning is the evidence suggesting petitioners' motivation may be financial rather than purely welfare-based. The unauthorized access to private financial documents, the pressure to sign power of attorney, and the escalation only after Mrs. Morrison refused to cede control all suggest an agenda beyond simple concern. The petition for guardianship is denied. The petition for declaratory judgment is granted. Mrs. Beatrice Morrison is declared competent and in no need of a guardian. Furthermore, this court orders that petitioners Morrison and Morrison cease all attempts to interfere with Mrs. Morrison's independent living. No further guardianship petitions will be entertained without clear medical evidence of actual decline from independent medical professionals. This court commends Mrs. Morrison for her careful documentation and appropriate advocacy for her own rights. This is exactly how a competent person should respond to unwanted control attempts. They assumed I would fade away. They were wrong. And now there was a court order proving it. But 3 days after the ruling, something happened that showed me this fight wasn't over. It was just changing form. Before I continue this story, kindly subscribe, like, turn on the notification bell, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. 3 days after the court ruling, I received a call from my bank. The voice on the other end was professional but concerned. "Mrs. Morrison, this is David Chen from Fraud Prevention. We've flagged some unusual activity on your account and need to verify it with you directly." My chest tightened. What kind of activity? "Someone attempted to wire transfer $75,000 from your savings account to an external account this morning. The request came through our online portal using your login credentials. We blocked it pending verification. Did you authorize this transfer?" "Absolutely not. I don't even know how to do wire transfers online." "That's what we suspected. Mrs. Morrison, someone has access to your online banking credentials. We're freezing your accounts immediately and issuing new access codes. But you need to come to the branch in person to verify your identity and file a formal fraud report." I was at the bank within an hour. David Chen walked me through what had happened. Someone had logged into my account at 3:47 a.m. while I was asleep and attempted to transfer $75,000 to an account registered to something called Morrison Family Trust. "There is no Morrison Family Trust," I said. "At least not one I created." "We suspected as much. Mrs. Morrison, whoever did this had your username and password. Do you write those down anywhere? Share them with anyone?" I thought back. Then I remembered. 6 months ago, before my surgery, Terrence had helped me set up online banking. He'd watched me create the password. He'd even written it down on a piece of paper, just in case you forget it. I'd thrown that paper away, but he'd been there when I created it. He knew the password. "My son knows my login information. He helped me set up the account." David's expression hardened. "I see. Mrs. Morrison, this is technically identity theft and fraud, even if it's a family member. You have the right to file a police report." "Can we start with just securing my accounts? I want to think about the police report." "Of course. But Mrs. Morrison, I'm required to tell you, if someone tried once, they'll likely try again. You should consider all your financial accounts compromised." I spent the next 3 hours at the bank. New account numbers. New passwords, complex ones I created without anyone watching. New security protocols requiring in-person verification for any large transfers. When I got home, I called Patricia. "They tried to steal $75,000 from my account. Wire transfer while I was sleeping. The bank caught it." "Did you file a police report?" "Not yet, but Patricia, this was Terrence. He's the only one who knew my online banking password." "You need to file a report. This is fraud, and it shows exactly what I suspected. They're not done trying to control your assets. They lost in court, so now they're trying to steal directly." "He's my son." "He's someone who tried to steal $75,000 from you. File the report." I didn't want to. Despite everything, despite the guardianship petition and the court battle, Terrence was still my son. Filing a police report felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But that afternoon, something else happened that made the decision for me. I found my back door unlocked. Not just unlocked, slightly open. I knew I'd locked it that morning. I was meticulous about locks, especially since the guardianship fight started. Someone had been in my house. I walked through carefully, looking for what might be missing or disturbed. Nothing obvious in the living room. Kitchen looked normal. My bedroom seemed untouched. Then I went to my study. My filing cabinet, the one where I kept important documents, was open. Papers were slightly disarranged, like someone had been searching through them quickly. I checked what was there. My will still there, medical records still there, financial statements still there. Then I realized what was missing. The folder with my court victory documentation, Judge Foster's ruling, the medical evaluations, the statements from my doctor and financial advisor, all the evidence I'd used to prove my competence. Someone had taken the originals. I called Patricia immediately. Someone broke into my house and took my court documents, everything proving I'm competent. Do you have copies? You have copies in your office, but the originals are gone. Call the police. Right now. File a report for the attempted fraud and the break-in. This is escalating beyond civil court. This is criminal behavior. I called the police. Officer Sarah Martinez came to my house and took my statement. The attempted wire transfer, the break-in, the missing documents. Mrs. Morrison, do you have any idea who might have done this? My son and daughter-in-law. They just lost a court case where I proved I'm competent to manage my own affairs. Now someone's trying to steal from my bank account, and someone took the documents proving I won that case. You're saying your own son is stealing from you. I'm saying someone who knows my banking password tried to wire transfer $75,000 this morning. And someone who has a key to my house, which my son does, came in and took specific documents from my filing cabinet. Officer Martinez, I know how this sounds, but I need this documented. She took detailed notes, photographed the filing cabinet, the back door, everything. She gave me a case number and said a detective would follow up. That evening, my phone rang. It was Terrence. His voice was cold. I heard you filed a police report, accusing me of fraud and breaking into your house. How could you do this? How could I? Terrence, someone tried to steal $75,000 from my bank account this morning using login information only you know. And someone broke into my house and took my court documents. Who else would have done that? So you immediately assume it's me, your own son. You really think that little of me. I think you and Fiona just spent months trying to have me declared incompetent so you could control my money. You lost, and now someone's trying to steal it directly. The timing seems pretty clear. I didn't touch your bank account, and I didn't break into your house. Then who did? I don't know, maybe you're confused about your password. Maybe you forgot you left the door unlocked. Mom, this is exactly the kind of thing that proves you need help. You're making accusations that don't make sense. There it was again. The suggestion that I was confused, that my reality wasn't trustworthy, that my concerns were symptoms of decline rather than responses to actual threats. Terrence, the bank has documentation of the attempted transfer. The police have documentation of the break-in. This isn't confusion. This is crime. And you're the only person who had the information and access to do both. Well, I didn't do it. And the fact that you'd accuse me shows how far gone you are. You know what, Mom? You've made it clear you don't want family in your life. Fine. You can handle everything yourself. Don't call me when you have your next fall and there's no one to help you. He hung up. I sat in my living room, my violated living room where someone had broken in and gone through my private files, and I felt something shift inside me. For months, I'd been defensive, proving I was competent, documenting my ability to manage independently, fighting to maintain my right to live my own life. But I'd been reacting to their attacks, defending against their accusations, playing by their rules. That needed to change. I called Patricia. I want to go on offense, not just defense. What can we do? We can file for a restraining order based on the harassment, the attempted theft, and the break-in. We can pursue criminal charges for the fraud attempt. We can send a cease and desist letter threatening civil suit for emotional distress and elder abuse. How aggressive do you want to be? I want them to understand that I'm not a victim they can manipulate. I'm someone who fights back. Over the next week, Patricia filed everything. A restraining order prohibiting Terrence and Fiona from contacting me or coming within 100 yards of my home. A formal complaint with the police requesting investigation of the fraud attempt. A civil complaint for harassment and attempted exploitation. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for 10 days out. In the meantime, I did something else. I called Brianna, my granddaughter, Terrence and Fiona's daughter. She was 26, lived across the country in Portland, and we'd only spoken a handful of times over the years. Brianna, this is your grandmother. We need to talk about your parents. Grandma B, is everything okay? No, and I think you should know what's been happening. I told her everything. The guardianship petition, the court battle, the attempted theft, the break-in, all of it. Brianna was silent for a long time. Then she said quietly, "That sounds like Mom." What do you mean? Mom is Controlling always has been. Growing up, she managed every aspect of my life. What I ate, what I wore, who I spent time with, what activities I did. She said it was because she knew what was best for me. When I turned 18 and moved out, she was furious. She said I was making dangerous decisions and I'd regret not listening to her. How did your father react? He backed her up. He always backs her up. Grandma, I'm not surprised they tried to take control of your life. I'm just sorry I didn't warn you. Why didn't you? Because I thought maybe they'd be different with you. That maybe their need to control was just about me. But it sounds like it's about anyone they think should listen to them. Brianna, I have a question. Did you know about the guardianship petition? No, they don't tell me things anymore. We're barely in contact. I talk to Dad maybe once every few months, and even then it's superficial. Mom and I don't speak at all. Why not? Because when I moved to Portland and started my own life, she tried to sabotage it. She called my employer and told them I had mental health issues and shouldn't be trusted with responsibility. She contacted my landlord and said I was financially unstable. She did everything she could to force me to move back home where she could help me. I had to get a lawyer and send a cease and desist letter to my own mother. This was a pattern, not just with me. Fiona had done this before with her own daughter, and Terrence had enabled it. Brianna, I'm filing a restraining order. There's going to be a hearing. Would you be willing to testify about your own experiences with your mother's controlling behavior? Absolutely. Grandma, I'm sorry this is happening to you, but I'm glad you're fighting back. Most people don't. They just give in because it's easier than the conflict. I'm too old to take the easy path. I'd rather fight. Good, tell me when and where. I'll be there. The restraining order hearing was intense. Judge Foster again, the same judge who'd ruled on the guardianship petition. He recognized all of us immediately. We're back already, he said, looking at the calendar. It's been 3 weeks since I ruled Mrs. Morrison competent and ordered you to cease interference. Now we have a petition for a restraining order based on alleged fraud and harassment. Mr. Winters, what's going on? Robert Winters stood. Your Honor, there's no evidence my clients were involved in any fraud or break-in. Mrs. Morrison is making unfounded accusations. There's a police report documenting an attempted wire transfer using information only her son possessed. There's documentation of a break-in where specific court documents were stolen. Mr. Winters, this doesn't look unfounded. Circumstantial at best. The attempted transfer could have been external fraud. The break-in could have been random. Mrs. Morrison is assuming my clients were involved without proof. Patricia stood. Your Honor, the timing is not coincidental. 3 weeks after losing a guardianship case, someone tries to steal from Mrs. Morrison's account and steal the documents proving she won that case. The only people with motive and access are the petitioners from that case. Judge Foster looked at Terrence and Fiona. Do you want to testify? Fiona stood. Your Honor, we've been trying to help Mrs. Morrison, and she's responded with hostility and false accusations. We didn't attempt any fraud. We didn't break into her house. We've actually been trying to respect the court's ruling and stay away from her. But now she's dragging us back to court with these ridiculous claims. If you've been staying away, why did someone try to access her bank account using login information her son helped create? I don't know. Maybe she gave her password to someone else. Maybe it was hacked, but it wasn't us. Then Patricia called Brianna. Ms. Morrison, what is your relationship to the parties in this case? Fiona Morrison is my mother. Terrence Morrison is my father. Beatrice Morrison is my grandmother. Tell the court about your mother's behavior pattern. Brianna described her childhood under Fiona's control. The micromanaging. The inability to let Brianna make her own decisions. And then what happened when Brianna moved out? My mother called my employer and told them I had mental health issues that made me unreliable. She called my landlord and claimed I was financially unstable. She did everything possible to sabotage my independence because she couldn't accept that I was capable of managing my own life. I had to get a lawyer and send her a cease and desist letter threatening legal action if she didn't stop. How did your father respond to this? He supported her. He said she was just worried about me and I was being ungrateful. He enabled every controlling behavior. Do you see similarities between what happened to you and what's happening to your grandmother? Absolutely. My mother can't let people make their own decisions. When they resist her control, she escalates. She tries to prove they're incompetent or unstable. She uses any method available to force compliance. What she's doing to my grandmother is exactly what she did to me, just with different tactics. Fiona stood up, furious. How dare you? You're lying about me to protect a grandmother you barely know. Judge Foster banged his gavel. Mrs. Morrison, sit down. But Fiona kept going. She's ungrateful and vindictive, just like her grandmother. I tried to give her a good life and she threw it back in my face, and now she's doing this. Mrs. Morrison, I said sit down. Fiona sat, but her outburst had done the damage. The judge had seen exactly who she was. Judge Foster's ruling was swift. I'm granting the restraining order. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison are prohibited from contacting Mrs. Beatrice Morrison directly or indirectly. They are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of her residence. They are prohibited from accessing or attempting to access her financial accounts. Any violation will result in arrest. Furthermore, I'm ordering a police investigation into the attempted wire transfer and the break-in. If evidence connects either petitioner to these incidents, criminal charges will be pursued. Mrs. Morrison, Mrs. Beatrice Morrison, I commend you again for your appropriate self-advocacy. You have every right to live free from harassment and exploitation. This order will ensure that. As we left the courtroom, Fiona tried to approach me. This isn't over. Patricia stepped between us. You just violated the restraining order by approaching within 500 feet. Want to be arrested right now. Fiona backed away, her face twisted with rage. That night, I sat in my house, now truly mine again, protected by court order, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Safe. They assumed I would fade away. When I didn't, they tried to force it. When that failed, they tried to steal from me. Now they had nothing, no access, no control, no power over me at all. But 2 weeks later, I discovered that safety was an illusion. Because Fiona had one more move to make, and it was the most dangerous one yet. Before I continue this story, kindly subscribe, like, turn on the notification bell, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the voice on the other end was professional but urgent. Mrs. Morrison, this is Natalie Grant from Adult Protective Services. We've received multiple reports of self-neglect and unsafe living conditions at your address. I need to schedule a home visit immediately. Multiple reports? From whom? I can't disclose the sources, but Mrs. Morrison. When we receive multiple independent reports within a short time frame, we're required to investigate. Can I come by this afternoon? Of course, but I should tell you, I've been dealing with false reports from family members who are under a restraining order. This is likely more of the same. I understand. That's why I need to see for myself. I'll be there at 2 p.m. I spent the next 3 hours in a state of cold fury. Multiple reports. Which meant Fiona hadn't filed one complaint. She'd orchestrated several, probably from different people, to make it look like multiple independent sources were concerned. It was calculated, strategic, and exactly the kind of escalation I should have anticipated. When Natalie Grant arrived, she was thorough and professional. She walked through my entire house, checking refrigerator contents, bathroom cleanliness, medication organization, safety hazards. She asked detailed questions about my daily routine, my social connections, my ability to manage finances and healthcare. After 90 minutes, she sat down with me in my living room. Mrs. Morrison, I see no evidence whatsoever of self-neglect or unsafe conditions. Your home is clean and well-maintained. You're clearly managing your medications appropriately. You have strong social connections and financial stability. Whatever these reports claimed, they're not supported by what I'm observing. Can you tell me what they claimed? Multiple reports alleged that your home was filthy, that you weren't bathing regularly, that medications were scattered everywhere creating overdose risk, that you had no food in the house, that you were isolated with no social contact. Mrs. Morrison, none of that is true. This appears to be a case of malicious reporting. I have a daughter-in-law who recently lost a guardianship petition against me and is under a restraining order for harassment. This is retaliation. I suspected as much. Mrs. Morrison, I'm going to file a report stating that all allegations are unfounded and appear to have been made in bad faith. I'm also going to flag your file so that future reports from the same sources will be viewed with extreme skepticism. But I need to warn you, if these reports continue, even if they're false, the cumulative effect can be problematic. It creates an official record of concerns, even if each individual investigation finds nothing wrong. So she can keep harassing me through the system, and there's nothing I can do. You can pursue legal action for filing false reports. It's a crime to make knowingly false statements to government agencies. Talk to your attorney. After Natalie left, I called Patricia. Fiona filed multiple false reports with APS. The investigator found nothing wrong and documented them as malicious, but she warned me that if Fiona keeps doing this, it creates a bad cumulative record. That's her strategy. Death by 1,000 cuts. Make enough reports, create enough investigations, and eventually the sheer volume starts to look like legitimate concern even if each individual report is false. It's insidious. What do? We document every false report. We get the investigators' findings in writing, and we file criminal charges for making false statements to government agencies. Fiona is violating the restraining order by continuing to interfere with your life, even if she's doing it indirectly through APS reports. Let me handle it. But that evening, something else happened that showed me Fiona's strategy was even more comprehensive than I'd realized. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, knocked on my door. She looked uncomfortable. Beatrice, I need to tell you something. A woman came to my house this afternoon asking questions about you. What kind of questions? About whether I've noticed you struggling, whether your house looks neglected, whether I've seen signs of confusion or memory problems. She said she was conducting a wellness assessment and talking to neighbors to get a complete picture of your situation. What did this woman look like? 50s, brown hair, very professional. She had a clipboard and official-looking papers. That was my daughter-in-law. She's under a restraining order. She's not supposed to contact me or anyone connected to me. Mrs. Chen's eyes widened. She didn't say she was your daughter-in-law. She made it sound like she was from some government agency. Beatrice, I'm so sorry. I told her you seemed to be managing fine, but now I'm worried I gave her information she shouldn't have. What exactly did you tell her? Just that I see you regularly, that your house always looks well-maintained, that you seem healthy and independent. I didn't say anything negative. That's fine. Thank you for telling me. After Mrs. Chen left, I sat down and thought through Fiona's strategy. She was building a case again, not through the courts this time, but through creating an overwhelming appearance of concern. Multiple APS reports, neighbor interviews, creating a paper trail that made it look like many people were worried about me. Even if each individual concern was investigated and dismissed, the cumulative effect could be powerful. Look how many reports there are. Look how many investigations. All this smoke, there must be fire somewhere. It was brilliant in its maliciousness, and it wouldn't stop until I made it stop. I called Patricia. She's interviewing my neighbors, pretending to be from some official agency. That's fraud, and it's a restraining order violation. Do you have proof it was her? Mrs. Chen's description matches. And who else would be conducting wellness assessments of me? We need actual proof. Can you ask Mrs. Chen to call the police if the woman comes back? Get a photo if possible. I talked to Mrs. Chen and 3 other neighbors. I explained the situation, that my daughter-in-law was under a restraining order and was now impersonating officials to gather information about me. I asked them to refuse any questions and to call the police immediately if anyone approached them about me again. 2 days later, it worked. Mr. Peterson, who lived 3 houses down, called me. Beatrice, that woman you warned us about just came to my door. I told her I wasn't answering questions and I was calling the police. She left quickly, but I got a photo of her walking away. He texted me the photo. It was unmistakably Fiona. I forwarded it to Patricia, who forwarded it to the police with a restraining order violation complaint. The police picked Fiona up that afternoon. She was arrested for violating the restraining order and for impersonating a government official while conducting the neighbor interviews. She spent the night in jail. Terrence called me, furious. You had my wife arrested. She was just trying to make sure you were okay. She was violating a court order. She's prohibited from contacting me directly or indirectly. Going to my neighbors pretending to be a government official is indirect contact, and it's fraud. This is insane. You're destroying our lives over nothing. Terrence, your wife tried to have me declared incompetent. When that failed, she or someone with your login tried to steal $75,000 from my bank account. When that failed, someone broke into my house and stole my court documents. When I got a restraining order, she filed multiple false reports with APS. Then she impersonated a government official to interview my neighbors. That's not nothing. That's a sustained campaign of harassment and exploitation. We just want to make sure you're safe. No, Fiona wants control, and you've enabled every step of this because you can't see past what your wife tells you to think. Terrence, I raised you to be stronger than this, to think for yourself, to recognize manipulation. What happened to you? He hung up without answering. The criminal charges against Fiona moved forward. Impersonating a government official, filing false reports, violating a restraining order. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but Patricia advised me to refuse. She needs real consequences. If you let her plead down to minimal penalties, she'll just keep escalating. The case went to trial 2 months later. It was brief. There was clear evidence for everything. Photos of Fiona at neighbors' houses, testimony from neighbors about her false representation, APS documentation of the false reports, police documentation of the restraining order violation. Fiona was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 6 months in jail, 2 years probation, a $10,000 fine, and a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with me. In his sentencing remarks, Judge Foster, the same judge who'd handled the guardianship case and the first restraining order, said something I'll never forget. Mrs. Fiona Morrison, you've engaged in a systematic campaign to control an elderly woman who has repeatedly demonstrated she doesn't need or want your control. You've used legal systems, government agencies, and fraud to try to override her autonomy. You've refused to accept no as an answer. This court will not tolerate elder abuse, even when it's perpetrated by family members claiming good intentions. 6 months in jail should give you time to reflect on the difference between concern and control. As Fiona was led away, she looked at me with pure hatred. You'll regret this. When you're lying helpless somewhere with no one to help you, you'll regret pushing away the only family who cared. I looked back at her calmly. I pushed away the family who tried to steal from me. I'm fine with that decision. After the trial, Terrence tried one last time to contact me. He left a voicemail. Mom, I can't believe you did this. You had Fiona put in jail. Our family is destroyed. Our daughter won't speak to us. Our friends have abandoned us. And it's all because you're too stubborn to accept help. I hope you're happy living alone in that house. I hope it was worth losing your son. I saved the voicemail. Then I called Brianna. Your mother was convicted. She's serving 6 months. I know. Dad called me, asking if I'd testify as a character witness for her. I said no. Grandma, I'm proud of you. You stood up to them when most people would have given in just to keep the peace. It didn't feel like a choice. It felt like survival. That's what it was. Grandma, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you lonely? Now that you've cut off Dad and fought with Mom, are you lonely living alone? I thought about that question carefully. Sometimes, but Brianna, I learned something important. Loneliness from being alone is bearable. Loneliness from being surrounded by people who treat you like a problem to manage. That's unbearable. I'd rather be alone and autonomous than accompanied and controlled. I understand that completely. Grandma, I'd like to visit more, if you're open to it. I'd like that very much. Over the next year, Brianna did visit. Once every few months, she'd fly in from Portland and we'd spend a long weekend together. She brought Maya, her partner. They were good people, kind, genuine, with no agenda beyond actually knowing me. Through Brianna, I learned what happened to Terrence and Fiona after the trial. Terrence filed for divorce while Fiona was in jail. He couldn't handle the shame of the criminal conviction, the judgment from friends and colleagues, the reality of who his wife actually was. Fiona, released after 6 months, moved to another state. She tried to contact me once through a third party, not apologizing, but demanding I clear her name by admitting I'd exaggerated the situation. I declined. Terrence tried to rebuild a relationship with Brianna. It was slow and difficult. He had to acknowledge his role in enabling Fiona's behavior. He had to face what he'd done to his own mother. Brianna said it would take years, maybe decades, before she could fully trust him again. He never contacted me, and I was fine with that. I lived in my house for another 4 years after the trial. I stayed healthy, independent, managing my own life exactly as I'd always done. When I was 83, I decided to move to a senior living community, not because I needed care, not because I couldn't manage, but because I wanted community. I wanted to be around people, have meals with others, participate in activities. It was my choice, my decision, my timeline. I sold my house and used the proceeds to fund a scholarship for young women from controlling homes who were working to build independent lives. I named it after Brianna. When I was 85, my health did start to decline. Gradually, naturally, the way it does when you're in your mid-80s. I arranged for the level of care I needed, when I needed it, in the way I wanted it. I had hospice in my final months. Brianna was there. Maya was there. Some friends from the senior community were there. Terrence was not there. He'd sent one letter, years after the trial, attempting an apology. I'd acknowledged it but made clear I wasn't interested in reconciliation. He'd made his choices. I'd made mine. The day before I died, Brianna asked me, "Grandma, do you have any regrets?" I thought about the question, about the guardianship fight, the criminal trial, the estrangement from my son, the years of being alone while I fought for the right to be alone on my own terms. "Only one," I said. "What's that?" "That I didn't fight back sooner. I spent the first few months defending, proving, justifying. I should have gone on offense immediately, made it clear that I was someone who fought back, not someone who could be worn down." "But you did fight back. You won." "Eventually. But Brianna, the real victory wasn't the court rulings or the criminal convictions. The real victory was refusing to fade away when they assumed I would." "What do you mean?" "They assumed hip surgery at 79 meant the beginning of the end. They assumed I'd come home weak, scared, grateful for someone to take charge. They assumed I'd fade away quietly into whatever version of me they needed me to be. They assumed wrong. And that, refusing to become what they needed me to be, that was the real fight. Everything else was just documentation. I died the next day, peacefully, surrounded by people I'd chosen to have in my life. My obituary, written by Brianna, said, "Beatrice Morrison, 85, who spent her final years teaching us that the strongest thing an elderly woman can do is refuse to fade away when others assume she will." The scholarship in Brianna's name continues. It's helped over 40 young women so far, women from controlling homes, women whose families tried to manage their futures, women who fought for the right to make their own decisions. Each one of them knows my story. About the daughter-in-law who assumed I'd fade away after surgery, about the months of fighting for autonomy, about refusing to become what others needed me to be. And each one of them understands. They assumed I would fade away. I didn't. That refusal, that simple, stubborn insistence on remaining fully myself, even when it would have been easier to give in, that was my legacy. Not the money I left behind, not the court victories, not even the relationships I preserved or cut off. My legacy was showing that you don't have to fade away just because someone assumes you will. You can stand up, document everything, fight strategically, refuse to cooperate with your own erasure. They assumed I would fade away. I didn't. And neither should anyone else who finds themselves in that position, being slowly erased by people who claim to be helping while really just taking control. Don't fade away. Fight. Document. Win. That was my final lesson, and it's the one I hope everyone who hears this story takes with them. When someone assumes you'll fade away quietly, the most powerful thing you can do is refuse. Stay visible, stay autonomous, stay yourself. No matter how many people try to convince you that fading away is easier, safer, or more appropriate for someone your age. Don't do it. I didn't. And neither should you.